Hey, good morning, everyone. The safety group thought it would be a good idea to talk about pre-use inspections for fall protection equipment since we have a lot of that work going on at our plant right now, a lot of elevated work taking place. So we'll discuss that as our toolbox talk topic today. So just a little intro. Some recent audits that the safety group has been doing show that pre-use inspections aren't routinely performed on our fall protection equipment. They're often overlooked, but are an important aspect of safe use of fall protection equipment because they are required from a company standpoint as well as a regulatory standpoint as an OSHA requirement. So I'm sure as you heard, there was an incident a few months ago where one of our employees noticed that their harness had a small tear in it within just a few minutes of donning that piece of equipment. This is something that more than likely could have been caught during a pre-use inspection, which is one of the reasons why we're going to be talking about that today. So to test everyone's knowledge at the end, we're going to end it by myself watching you as a group perform a pre-use inspection on a piece of your fall protection equipment. And also during my presentation, I'll do a visual demonstration on how to perform a pre-use inspection. So if you have any questions as I'm going along throughout that visual demo, just feel free to ask that and I'll get them answered for you. So moving along to the actual presentation part. So there are three important things to know regarding pre-use inspections for fall protection equipment. Number one is when equipment needs to be inspected. Number two is how to inspect that equipment. And number three is what to do when the equipment actually fails an inspection, which is not very common, but it definitely can happen. So we need to know what to do in the event that it does happen. So moving along to the first point I just mentioned, when equipment should be inspected. So it needs to be inspected before each use, as well as periodically throughout the work shift, and also once per year by a competent person. The once per year by a competent person is tracked through a work order inspection number located on each piece of equipment. So that's the first thing you want to look for on each piece of fall protection equipment, is if it has that inspection number and work order number. So moving along to the actual inspection part. So here I have a full body harness as well as two self-retracting lanyards that are connected to that harness via this connection piece right here. So moving along to our body harness inspection, first thing I mentioned was a manufacturer's label, which on our Miller style harnesses, which is what everyone has, that can be found on the inside flap. So you want to pull that tab back and make sure that it does have that label. It's legible and it does have that inspection and work order number on that. The next thing we're going to look for on our body harness is the inspection for our webbing, which is all this green and black material here. So we're going to run our fingers across all of this. We're going to look for frays, chemical damage, any sort of distortion, cuts, tears, abrasion, any damage that may have been caused with a normal wear and tear of this particular body harness. Just for time's sake, I'm going to move a little bit faster during the inspection, but at the end, I'd like for everyone to take their time and actually perform this as if you would be putting on this piece of equipment to work at an elevated height. So after we run our fingers along all of the webbing and inspect it, we're going to move along to our D-ring, which is this metal piece right here. So the D-ring is metal, so we do want to inspect it for rust, cracks, distortion, any sort of sharp edges that may have formed. We want to make sure it's kept out of the weather and out of the elements when we're storing this piece of equipment so that it doesn't become deteriorated over time. After we inspect our D-ring, we will move to our metal buckles, which on this particular harness, there are quite a few of them. As you can see, there are these pieces right here. So for each metal buckle, we want to, similarly to how we inspected the D-ring, make sure it's free from rust, cracks, distortion, sharp edges. If we find any of that on this piece, we're going to fell it and tag it out of service. After we perform that inspection, we should be good for our body harness. So if everything passes with it, we're good to use that particular body harness. We still need to inspect our self-retracting lanyards before we actually use the whole piece of equipment. So the first thing we're going to look at for inspections of it is our connector piece. It's a metal piece too. So inspect it for rust, cracks, distortion, sharp edges. Assuming that passes, we're going to move on to the casings of our self-retracting lanyards, which are the plastic pieces right here. So we want to make sure that the plastic on it it's in contact. We want to make sure that it doesn't have any cuts, any sort of breakage in it, so that no water or anything can seep through and cause damage inside. And we also want to make sure that the screws are connected that hold this casing together, make sure they're nice and tight. After we inspect the casing, we will move on to our connector piece. So the first one we want to look at is if it has a double locking mechanism. So if I just press this, it's not going to open. As if it has a double locking mechanism, I will apply pressure here and then open the piece like that. So that's what we want to see there. We want it to open freely and swing back freely without having to force any additional pressure onto it. It's a metal piece as well, so we're going to inspect it for rust, cracks, distortion, stuff of that nature. So we'll do that for both of our self-retracting lanyards. After those pass inspection, we will then move on to the actual lanyard itself. So as you can see right here, which is this piece, we're going to bring it out slowly and inspect this whole thing for any sort of webbing defects, such as frays, cuts, chemical damage, any sort of abrasions, cuts. So we're going to pull it all the way out and inspect it as we're pulling it out the whole 6 feet. So once we inspect both sides of this, we're going to release it, and it should go back to its original position. If it gets stuck along its path, it will fail inspection. After we inspect that part, we want to take it out piece by piece and see if it is catching whenever someone were to come into a fall arrest. So we'll do that for both SRLs there as well. We also want to make sure that these two have their manufacturer's label, which you can see right here, they do. So if fall protection equipment fails, there are some things that we need to do. So the first thing is tag it out of service and mark as do not use. You also need to remove it from all other fall protection equipment so that it doesn't get confused and accidentally picked up. You also need to notify your supervisor, myself, or someone else from the safety department, as we can perform another inspection and see if we need to replace it or fix that equipment. And at that point, you can obtain a new piece of equipment and continue work. So, are there any questions over any sort of the material we just covered? Okay, and if not, I'll ask everyone to grab a partner and perform a pre-use inspection on all your equipment with them. And I'd like for you to read out loud what you're actually inspecting so that we know what you're talking about and we're covering all aspects of that pre-use fall protection equipment inspection. I'll be around for questions and observations, so flag me down if you need anything, and thank you for your time.